In business schools, now almost every single university has courses in entrepreneurship. But they teach sometimes business students to think you can write down plans, you can think about this, come up with ideas, raise money, hire engineers. And the engineers could be in Russia, they could be in India, be anywhere. I say, no, you should have the engineer involved in your starting team, thinking up the ideas of what your product or your service can do. And you should never look at, oh, you've got to have a PhD, you've got to have a degree from college. You should always have at least somebody who's a businessman, who wants to have a business, a company that makes money to go on and, lead the world. And those are the people that we get to know. And you should have somebody who is marketing oriented, that wants the product themselves, that is the market, that wants what you have so desperately. They will make sure it's right and works well and it's not clumsy and not cluttered. Steve Jobs, at first, he learned marketing from Mike Markkula, and he learned it very well, learned how to speak it well and convince people this is what you should use a computer for.
In 1971, Knight changed the name of the company to Nike. In 1980, he took the company public, and overnight it was worth more than $100 million. That year also saw Nike reach a major milestone, cornering more than half of the athletic shoe market in the United States.
Said Phil Knight, he's got a Stanford MBA and he's selling Japanese sneakers. And so most people thought it was crazy, but I didn't think it was crazy. And the good thing was my college professor that I wrote the paper for didn't think it was crazy.
And the reason you were interested in running, that wasn't your first sport.
Well, my first sport was baseball, but I got cut from the baseball team. And we were talking earlier before about the coincidences in life. I was the last guy cut on a 25-man team. Just think if I'd have made that team, where would we be today?
We wouldn't all be runners, or nobody would be runners.
We wouldn't be sitting here talking today, I promise you that. But I did get cut.
And it hurt.
Oh, it killed me. And it still bothers me. But and my mother said, I had twin sisters that were twins, and my mother says, leave him alone, he's really suffering. And then finally she said, that's enough of this moping around the house. You either go out for track or get a paper route. So I went out for track.
Why shoes? I mean, why not knee socks or sweaters? I mean, what was it to start with shoes?
Shoes basically are the one important piece of equipment for a runner. That if it's basketball, it's a ball. If it's baseball, it's a bat and a mitt. And but running, shoes are it. And my old coach firmly believed that an ounce in a pair of shoes over a course of a mile was worth 10,000 pounds in the last 3 yards. And so he was obsessed with it, and it kind of caught my attention. And then I became kind of a guinea pig of his on experimental shoes, and so it built from there.
That Coach Knight is talking about was Bill Bowerman, a legend at the University of Oregon. Bowerman was determined to create a better running shoe for his athletes, but when his ideas went ignored by anyone who made running shoes, he decided to make his own. His passion soon became Knight's passion. Okay, so you decide to go off on this adventure. You're going to go around the world. You're also going to stop in Japan to see about these shoes.
I went to sporting goods stores and looked at the different shoes, and I saw the one that I thought made the most promise was made by Nitsuka Company Limited in Kobe, so I went to Kobe.
So you're in Japan, and you go visit the company, and you pretend like you are a company.
Yes.
But you weren't a company, though, right? You were not a company, but at least you became a company as you were sitting there in your mind.
That's right. That's the way I thought of it.
Okay,
That's right.
You became a company. Okay, so you sit down with these Japanese businessmen, right? And they had a shoe factory. They had a shoe. What was their shoe called?
Tiger.
Tiger. And so you sit there, and what happens?
There were about 20 people in their accounting department, and as I walked through, they all stood up and bowed, as if they're a visiting dignitary from the United States. And I'm 24 years old. I'm trying to sell myself. And I said, "Oh,
wearing your own suit,
wearing my one suit I owned, all my assets on my back." And I'm going in there. I'm not a natural salesman, and I said, "I may not get out of here alive." But I told them that I wanted to import Japanese track shoes into the United States, and it looked like they had a good product, and I wanted to talk about it. And they were thinking about exporting shoes to the United States. So we had, after initial awkwardness, we had some really interesting dialogue, and they brought in some shoes that they were working on, and there were some things to be really optimistic about, and I was into the shoes, and so I got a good response. So I ordered, I think, a dozen pair of shoes for samples.
But they said, what's your company, right?
Oh, yeah, and then they asked, what's your company name? I said, Blue Ribbon Sports.
And you just made that one up from
Blue
Ribbons at home?
Pretty much.
Just made it up, pulled it out of a hat?
Well, I had to have something, didn't I?
Did you think, like, this is just wild? I'm sitting there with these Japanese businessmen and sort of pretending I have this company, or didn't it hit you that way?
Well, it is something that I wanted to try. And the great thing about the entrepreneurship class I took, the professor had in probably 10 or 11 different outside speakers. And they had outside speakers that started in the most daring ways themselves. And so I said, this is what some entrepreneurs do.
But that deal with the Japanese company got out to a very slow start. It would take more than a year for Knight to receive the shoes.
Then finally, about December of 1963, they came. And I sent a few pair off to my old coach who was really interested in shoes. And so he said, I'm coming up to Portland next month, let's have lunch. So I'm hopeful for an order. And I go to lunch with him, and I get more than an order. I get the ultimate endorsement. He says, how about making me your partner? So I said, okay, Bowerman, you got to put up $500. We'll order 300 pair of shoes. And I would put up $500. He says, deal.
And so what do you do with the 300 pair?
So basically, I get on weekends and in the evenings, and I go out to high schools, and I say, I've got this great shoe, and it's at a good price, and it's a good value, and you should have your kids buy it. And then some of them would place orders there, and some of them would walk in at, ring the doorbell at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and my father would be watching TV, and there'd be a kid trying on a pair of shoes in his living room, and he was quite surprised at the whole thing, but intrigued as well.
And it was just you at that point and your coach and your partner.
Well, yeah, and then I would get people that, as it got going, that would go on a commission. They'd get $2 a pair for selling a pair of shoes, and we'd have people out doing that, which was ultimately where I met the guy, Jeff Johnson, who became our first full-time employee.
You know, it's when I reading the Shoe Dog, I thought, wow, this is adventure. That's what I thought in the beginning. This is exciting. This is an adventure. Why not? And I see crazy plan. I go, it's not a crazy plan. Why not?
You were right.
No, totally. But then as I read, it's the struggle. Then I think, you know what, this is a crazy plan, because you know it was incredible struggle. Even like, you know, the cash flow, you're going back and forth to the banks trying to get. I mean, that's where the persistence, and I mean, it did become, at least in my mind, you know, I would have thought, okay, this is a crazy plan.
Well, I suppose, but that's what I wanted to do, and I was going to fight it to the bitter end.
To you at the time that made this, so this is a crazy idea? I mean, here you were with like $300 in your pocket, and you're traveling the world, and you decide you're going to go off become the shoe guy.
I never thought of it as crazy, but I was acutely aware that it was a long shot. That, you know, if I could make this work, that's what I wanted to do, and it had a chance, and I was going to pursue that hard. But I knew at that time, I think the stats were 26 out of every 27 new businesses fail. And so this was a bit of a long shot, but I was going to play it for all I could.
Knight made a deal to distribute shoes made by a Japanese company called Tiger, which later became Asics. By 1971, Blue Ribbon Sports would sell in the United States close to 100,000 pairs of Tiger-made shoes and had nearly $2 million in sales.
The growth was good, and that was part of the problem. We got attention from other distributors in the U.S. who started trying to romance Tiger, said those guys can sell them many, we can sell a lot more, and that was what led to the break. We had a 3-year contract with them, and
recently signed.
Yes, recently signed, and yet he was sitting there on his visit to the United States, and he had this notebook in his briefcase that he kept referring to, and he said, well, this group in Utah thinks they can sell twice as many shoes as what you're selling in Utah, and he says, this group in Texas, and I'm going, what the hell? And so yes, he got up at one point to go to the bathroom, and I went into his briefcase and pulled the file out and stuck it under the blotter on my desk. And then he came back, we finished our discussions and said, well, let's meet for dinner. And Lindell and I opened the file, and we were horrified, but we Xeroxed it. And then the next morning, he came back, and I said, we'll say, okay, Mr. Katami, you can get your the tea in the coffee room there. It's waiting for you. And Waddell was in a wheelchair. He blocked the exit from the coffee room until I gave him the heads up that the file was back in the briefcase.
All right. So who is Waddell? I mean, are you right about
Bob
me, but who is he?
I wrote a book, from my viewpoint, about a band of brothers that got together to make this thing work. And Jeff Johnson, who I alluded to earlier, was the first, but Bob Waddell was probably the second or third, and he had been an outstanding long jumper on the Oregon track team who had a tragic accident building a canoe, so he was confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And Bowerman called and says, Waddell's talking about being a track coach. He said, I don't think that'll really work. He says, why don't you see how it works at your company? And so it started there, and he did a phenomenal job for us for 20 years.
At many points, you're really strapped for cash. You need money or you're going under. Banks are shutting you down left, right, and center. Tell me about the money situation with the Waddell family.
Yeah, we were strapped for cash. I was fighting with the banks. I would go to the bank almost every day just to let them know where we were, and so their collateral was good. It was shoes were selling, profits were coming, but we had no.
They didn't always believe you.
Well, they were somewhat skeptical, but some of the officers were. But Waddell and then I hired one of my students called Penny Parks. That one day I saw that both of them were not cashing their payroll checks. They were keeping them in a drawer. So they were so sympathetic to the whole effort and so into the whole effort. And of course, Waddell was a great officer at Nike, and Penny Parks became Mrs. Knight. But at one point, Waddell said, you know, my mom and dad are working people. They don't have much money, but they said they've got about $3,000 in savings. They'd be happy to loan it to you. And I says, boy, Bob, I hope I never have to use it, but that's really wonderful. And there came a time about 6 or 8 months later, and I says, we're really hurting. I says, if that offer's still there, I'm going to have to take it. And so he said, okay. And Mrs. Waddell gave me the check, and I says, thank you so much for doing this, but why? And she says, if you can't trust the employer of your son, who are you going to trust? And so we took the money, and we signed a note that I had 6% interest. And they left the money in there for something like 7 years. And when we went public, I says, we should convert that to stock, which we did. And that was worth over $1 million when we went public. And it was delightful hearing Bob tell the story about telling his parents. He says, Mom and Dad, you're millionaires. And she said, I don't understand how this works. And he explained it to him, and then she called her daughter and says, we're millionaires. My son Bob told me so.
Weren't your parents sort of saying, like, you know, Phil, let's do this accounting business? I mean, this crazy dream, like you're traveling the world for shoes. You don't know anything about shoes.
Right. That was certainly my father's opinion.
That's your father's opinion?
Yes.
By the way, did he ever say, Phil, you were right?
There's a story in the book which is kind of explains both my father and the moment, that he never really said you were right. But he used to call every night to find out how his grandkids were doing. And there was that terrible moment when Rudy Tomjanovich got hit by Kermit Washington in an NBA game. And it was awful. It really dislodged part of his head skull from his brain. And I got home late, but he had been watching the game, and he called me. He says, did you see that? And I says, no, I didn't watch it on TV. I just got home. And he says, well, there was the best close-up of the shoes. And that was the moment when he said, it's okay.
The swoosh, the very famous Nike swoosh, how much did you pay for that design?
Well, when we switched from Tiger to Nike, we were in a hurry. We had to get a brand name, and we had to get a logo for the shoe in a hurry. So there was a graphic arts student at Portland State that had done some work for us, and she charged $2 an hour, and we said, how about coming up with a logo for the shoe? And she spent 17.5 hours on it, so it cost us $35. And as I said, it was easily worth it. It turned out to be fairly iconic. But when we went public in 1980, we gave her 500 shares of stock, which she still owns. We were probably about $600 million of sales then by about 1984. And we really needed a boost, and we thought this young basketball player from North Carolina might be able to help us that way, and his name was Michael Jordan. And
but he wanted Adidas.
Well, he had worn Adidas, you know, in his high school games, and he liked it. But we came out and we sold him, and ultimately he believed in us, and we sold pretty well that day.
This you can buy. You cannot do this. Can.
So that was a huge turning point to get Michael Jordan.
Absolutely. And still to this day, that's another part that I'm really proud of, that we really turned an endorsement into a brand. And obviously he was a huge part of that because he was such an exciting player and so likable. And but yeah, that changed the industry really. There's venture capital firms now. So if you have access to money now that you never had back in the 60s, so that makes it easier. So you kind of have both sides of that coin.
Anytime you're thinking you were going to quit along the way?
Nope.
Even when the banks were shutting you down?
Nope.
You never did? How about your wife, Penny? She think you were nuts?
You know what? Nobody could have stood by me more. That when the darkest day, when we got kicked out of the second bank and they told me that they'd had to notify the FBI. She was solid. She just said, well, they can't take the house because we don't have enough equity in it for them to take the house. So, and you can get a job as a CPA, we'll be all right.
Why do you think she stood by you like that? Because, I mean, it was tough.
There was a sort of faith there, which I'm very grateful for.
So you've given a lot of money away.
Yeah.
You're one of those horrible 1%ers giving all this money away for cancer research and everything else, and you're a wealthy man, you want to die broke?
No, I don't want to die broke, but I am going to give most of it away over the period past my lifetime. But I will give most of it away. No, I think I really had an entrepreneurial bent. When I took the class in entrepreneurship, the first lecture was that there is an entrepreneurial type. It's different than the kind of management type, and I recognized myself. So I would have tried some other entrepreneurial endeavor. I'm not sure what it would have been, and I'm sure it wouldn't have been as successful.
But I mean, but if you look at this one, I mean, this one, you know, started in 1962-ish, and it really didn't, I mean, really get going for about 15 or 18 years. I mean, it really wasn't. I mean, there were so many hurdles. There were so many times to give up and quit and do something else, that pick another product.
Well, I'm glad I stuck with it, and I never doubted. I never thought I'm going to quit. In fact, I thought just the opposite. If we don't make it, I'm going to try it again.
Is the glue that holds great companies together, because you have to love what you're doing, because this is the way people have chosen to work in the world. And if you're going to work for a company, you might as well love what you do. And for us, it's understanding the roots, and that gives people the energy and the fire and the appreciation for competition in sport. And that passion, you can only get it if you're hooked into why you exist. I mean, our employees understand, what are we doing here? Why do we exist? And if they understand that, everybody excels.
To approach the main door, workers walk along the rocky road, which symbolizes man's journey from an uncertain past to a more promising Nike future.
It is a self-contained world. It is a beautiful place, first of all, but it's also self-contained, in which you're encouraged to spend long hours. It's got restaurants, it's got a laundry, you can get your hair done, you can work out, it's got a great gym, and of course your office where you can work and work and work.
It's more than just a business. It's more than just sports. It is a mission. I mean, this is what we've committed our lives to doing, so let's make it something worthwhile.
The young Phil Knight always wanted to be number one, but as a student at the University of Oregon, he only ran the mile well enough to come second. But his aggressive will to win permeates the whole company. After a brief spell as an accountant, he started selling running shoes from the boot of his car. Nike, the brand, was born in 1971 and was soon known as the Saturday Night Live of the sports biz. Bill Bowerman, Knight's college track coach, designed the famous waffle-shaped sole. Together they spotted the jogging boom and helped turn a non-essential product, the plimsoll, into a mainstream necessity, the sneaker.
Fortune magazine at the time said there's no greater sign that Nike's lost its way than paying $500,000 a year for a basketball player out of North Carolina. So it was not unanimous across the business board that that was the right thing to do.
Playing for the Chicago Bulls, Jordan was an overnight sensation. By the late 80s, Nike's Air Jordans was the most popular shoe on the planet, with sales of $200 million a year.
I knew by me being involved in the game so intimately that fans loved heroes. You had to have a hero, whether he was the local high school player. That to a community was someone that they would emulate. They would, if he sold a T-shirt, they'd probably want to wear the same T-shirt, the same number that he wore. And so that's what I try to sell them. You don't need every Tom, Dick, and Harry wearing the shoe. You need great individuals wearing the shoe, or the product, it was called.
And then we tied it all together with really our first television advertising campaign, and it worked pretty well. Here's a 17-year-old, just very uncertain of everything, and met Bill Bowerman, and I've often said, if there's no Bill Bowerman, there's no me.
Bill Bowerman was Knight's coach. He was obsessed with tearing apart track shoes and reassembling them, creating sort of a Franken shoe of his very own. What were they like?
Well, they were just, he would make them out of goat skin, and so they would just have almost no form in the upper, and then he'd get a spike plate taken off another shoe and then glue it on. They were pretty ugly, but they were light, and I was one of his guinea pigs, and that, kind of planted a seed.
That seed took root while getting his MBA at Stanford. Knight wrote a paper outlining a strategy of manufacturing running shoes in Japan, where the labor was cheaper.
Well, ever since I wrote it, it was sort of ticking away in there. It just kept kind of growing.
After graduating, Knight put his paper into action, convincing a Japanese company to let him distribute their brand of running shoe, called Tigers, here in the U.S. He began selling them out of the trunk.
Now that you have graduated, the goal should not be to seek a job or even a career, but to seek a calling. That search has just begun. In your time here, you've probably gone through 50 or 100 different case studies. And in the years ahead, you'll probably go through thousands more. Those case studies are not about decision-making, not even about judgment. They're about a search for wisdom. I have in my travels occasionally met promising young people who insist they are not going to ask for help along the way. They want to figure it out themselves. Mine was the opposite approach. It is hard enough out there. Get all the help you can. Getting help really is just a part of a lifelong search for wisdom. Here are just a few of the people who stooped to help us along the way, and all but one of the following began their help before we were ever a public company. Ralph D'Annunzio, president of the New York Stock Exchange. Tom Paine, the executive director of NASA. Masaru Hayami, the president of Nisho Iwai. As we increased our volume, we became Nisho Iwai's most profitable customer in the world, which got me into meetings with their CEO. We developed a friendship, and for 5 years in a row, I spent a weekend with him and his wife at their beach cabin near Atami, which wasn't just a pleasant weekend, it was also a tutorial on business and leadership. 2 years after he stepped down from Nisho, Masaru Hayami was named the governor of the Bank of Japan, which is the Federal Reserve of Japan. When he passed away, at his memorial service in Tokyo, per his instructions, draped over his coffin was a Nike banner. And don't be afraid to come back to the school that spawned you. Frank Schellenberger always raised my spirits when I was feeling low and wanted to get a hold of him. Bob Davis and Mike Spence each spent 10 years on the Nike board of directors. And there are a couple other lessons. 2 9s working together will beat 2 10s working for their own careers every time. Ability and desire must always trump money and power. If you can't get financing, don't be afraid to go 7,000 miles from home. Government is part of business, any business. There is such a thing as managing creativity, and dare to take chances, lest you leave your talent buried in the ground. And where there is no struggle, there can be no art. And finally, there is this thought. 10 years from now, the first of you will be asked to give the commencement speech to what will then be the finest class in the school's history. You'll be a bit torn. You are multitasked to the max. 2 kids. One has an ear infection and needs to get to the doctor right away. Your husband is more needy than usual, and he has a flight in the morning to Europe for 10 days. Your company is at a critical point in its strategic planning, and everybody looks to you for what the answers will be. Plus, the company has a PR crisis, and you have a TV appearances scheduled for 5 days straight. There is no time. There is no time. And then you'll accept. Because of the honor, because of the chance to have some influence on the most able, best prepared young people on the planet. And you will accept, though it is hard to see now, because there is a part of you that longs to go back to a place and a time and a self forever gone. And looking for things to say, include in your consideration moments from the school's history. You might even look back to that time from the deep past, that moment over 6 decades before, when Frank Schellenberger, beloved professor of entrepreneurship, said the words that meant so much to me, the words that became the mantra for his class, the words that said, The only time you must not fail is the last time you try.
I didn't know where he was headed. And it was kind of scary, and you want to save that person because you love them, but in the same token, you can't help somebody if they don't want help.
Throughout his swimming career, Michael Phelps personified perfection. 18 gold medals, unparalleled success. But bubbling beneath the surface was a complicated relationship with his father, Fred, who divorced Michael's mother when the young swimmer was 9.
I felt like he was kind of abandoning me. And I was just like, I'm not even giving any energy. I'm not putting any energy into something that I thought was a dead-end street.
My dad and Michael are very similar. They're strong-willed, they're opinionated, they speak their mind. And so when there are two strong-willed, opinionated people that speak their mind, it tends to create a clash.
As Michael and his father, a 28-year Maryland State trooper, drifted apart, Bob Bowman, Phelps' coach since he was 11,
You push 201.
became more of a father figure, tasked with navigating Phelps' complex personality.
He would be having a stretch of practices where maybe things weren't going very well, or maybe he was very tired, and he might have an emotional kind of reaction. And if I tried to really talk him through the whole thing, it might get back to something that maybe had to do with his dad.
8 gold medals in Beijing in 2008 didn't ease Phelps' frustration. Phelps says he despised the image of perfection his success had created. He wanted out. 6 months after Beijing, this photo emerged.
It was not a beautiful Michael Phelps world. After the Bong photo, Michael didn't trust anybody except for me and maybe his mom and a couple other people. He was wary of everything.
In London in 2012, Phelps retired as the most decorated Olympian of all time.
Done, bye, see ya, finished. Nothing, I wanted nothing to do with the sport. I was done.
Retirement brought with it freedom he had never known.
I gained 30 pounds. Probably had some fun, too much fun. Whatever I wanted to do, I did. I was a little twerp.
By that point, Michael had enough money, enough friends who were outside of swimming, that he could basically totally isolate himself from us and not deal with us. I thought it was going in a direction where something really bad was going to happen.
Eventually, retirement led to boredom, and Phelps asked Bowman about a comeback for one last Olympics in Rio.
I said, no, cannot do that. We can't go through this again. No, I'll do it the right way, okay.
But early in the morning of September 30th, 2014, Phelps failed to live up to his promise.
I knew that he was out at the casino. He said, hey, I'm done. I'm going home now. And I said, okay, are you sure you're okay to drive? And he's like, yeah, I'm fine. I said, okay. And I said, call me when you get home.
Phelps had been drinking at the Horseshoe Casino in Baltimore when police pulled him over for going 81 in a 55 in the no passing allowed Fort McHenry tunnel.
I was setting myself up for some kind of failure, and I was screaming for help.
Be advised, last name Phelps, first name Michael.
A breathalyzer test revealed a blood alcohol level of 0.14, nearly twice the legal limit. Phelps was arrested and charged with DUI, his second in 10 years.
He's lucky no one got hurt, but in the same token, that's heavy. It's not like it's your parents that are disappointed in you. It's the weight of the world.
I honestly felt like that was his third strike and that was it. That his ability to kind of be Michael Phelps, was kind of over.
For the next 5 days, Phelps says he stayed in his Baltimore home, curled up in his bedroom.
For a moment, I thought it was going to be the end of my life, literally. Just because it was like, second one, how many times is he going to mess up? I was like, yeah, it'll probably just be better without me. I didn't really leave my room, didn't eat, didn't really sleep. I just figured that it was the best thing to do was just to end my life.
Advice from longtime friend, mentor, and fellow Baltimore icon Ray Lewis lifted Phelps.
I'm like, baby boy, listen to me. This is when we fight. This is when real character shows up. Don't shut down, because if you shut down, we all lose. And so to hear a younger brother say some of the things he was saying, right, about, bro, and I'm like, really? Really? Okay, let me give you an example what you say messing up is. And so for me, I had to go back into some of my dark days and things that wasn't pretty on my side. And so what we started to reinstall in him was, let me show you who you are. I want to expose to you really who you are.
Lewis and others close to Phelps eventually convinced him to seek help at the Meadows, a behavioral rehabilitation facility just outside Phoenix.
Got into a car, shaking in the car, shaking when I got there. And I started texting my mom saying I was afraid for the first time in my life. I was out of my comfort zone. I didn't like that. I think when you find your lowest point in your life, I think you're kind of open to a lot of things to try to change it and to try to get back on the right path. I was just surrendering.
Between therapy sessions, Phelps often swam in a pool, far too confining for an 18-time Olympic champion.
I would take 2 strokes and get to the other side. So I was like, well, don't really know what I'm gonna do in here. I just started doing drills, flip turns, working on kick.
Phelps also buried himself in a book Ray Lewis had given him, The Purpose-Driven Life.
It's turned me into believing that there is a power greater than myself and there is a purpose for me on this planet.
Second, third day he got in and he called me. He was like, man, this book is crazy. He was like, the things that's going on, oh my gosh, my brain is, bro, I cannot thank you freaking enough, man. Like, you saved my life. And so that was the moment when I started to hear he coming out of it. He will make it. And then he started calling me with things he was reading from the book, and I was like, it's sinking in.
For a long time, I thought I was the bring the family back together baby. My therapist said, well, you failed. How does that feel? And then I read this, and I was like, you know what? I think it helped me when I was in a place where I needed the most help.
The lessons learned in those pages and in therapy convinced Phelps to try to rebuild his relationship with his father, Fred.
They were going to have a family week, and I was invited to come spend the time with him, which I immediately jumped on. RSVP'd, I'll be there.
Why?
He's my son. I love him.
I was shocked. I wasn't even going to invite him to Family Week. I just didn't think he would come. And I guess it was to the point where I was just like, why do I just want another no in my life?
I was apprehensive is not the word. Maybe scared. Not at what I would find, but how I would be received, which actually it was fear that was unfounded. As we saw each other, we shook hands, threw our arms around each other, gave a big hug.
It was good, challenging at times, but probably the biggest learning experience that we could have with one another, about one another, that we've ever had in our lives.
It was eye-to-eye contact. Okay, here's what I got to say, and here's what I need to ask. And it was honesty. Both ways.
I didn't want to have that what if. That's something that's so big for me. You know, I never wanted to go through my life and, God forbid, not have the chance to be able to share emotions that I wanted to share with him. It's kind of what I missed as a kid.
What was the hardest part of the time you were there?
Leaving.
Why?
Because I had my son back. Just didn't want to leave him. I had something back that I didn't know I would get back. When I did, there was love. Doesn't get better than that.
In November of 2014, Phelps left the Meadows and resumed training for Rio. 3 months later, he asked Nicole to become his wife. The couple would soon start a family. On May 5th, 2016, Phelps cradled his son, Boomer Robert, for the first time.
Just emotions just ran through my body when I was holding him, and right when he was born, I was in tears.
To know where we've been and what we've gone through and where we are today, and then to be able to see him and I guess our creation in his arms is one of the most amazing feelings I've ever felt.
It's a beautiful thing seeing that there's a beautiful little boy that my son was the father of. I hope he can learn from the mistakes that I've made. I think we both now kind of are aware after the rehab, you know, some of the things that I could have done, some of the things that he could have done, remembering them and having them be as an education instead of a scar or a bad memory.
It's the best, just being able to have the people who love me for me always there every day and supporting me. It's just incredible. It hasn't been the easiest road, and you know, we've had some bumps in it, but I had a goal of making my 5th Olympic team, and I'm enjoying the ride more now.
Every story has a beginning, and I don't know where this really begins, except I know in May the 19th, 1970, I came home to Jesus after a rock and roll career and lots of smoking dope, and come home to my wife, and she forgave me for 3.5 years of unfaithfulness, and we began to follow Jesus. And it was hard, it was trying, it was beautiful, but in 1976, something happened that wrecked my heart, my life. She had made several trips to the physician. He said, Linda, there's some problems. The long and short was, she had cancer of the uterus, and what was necessary was to have a hysterectomy, a surgery to remove all the female organs. I wasn't so concerned about that because we had 2 daughters and we had enough, and I didn't want any more children anyway, because I figured some of the drugs I did, why risk having a child deformed? And 2 weeks before the scheduled hysterectomy, a prophetic man, because back in those days, in the 70s, nobody was known as a prophet. But a very prophetic man called me and said, I need to see you. Something happened that's life-changing. He would go to a baseball field where there was some swings, kind of a playground, and he would go there in the evening and intercede. Retired school teacher, he prayed. He said, last night I was on a baseball field and Jesus just suddenly appeared in front of me. I'd never had that happen before. I was shocked, and the Lord said, it's okay, Kermit, but I have a message I want you to tell my servant, Ken Helson. I want you to tell him first, I've healed his seed, and I have never told anybody the reason I didn't even want any more children is I was concerned about the drugs I did. And here's a man that I barely had known only one other time saying, Jesus said, I've healed your seed. And you're going to have a son. And his name will be Jonathan David. And he will play the harp. He will sing like an angel. And he will write prophetic songs for his generation. And his music will go out all over the earth. Now, when you're 2 weeks from hysterectomy, that's dramatic. And I said, God, is this you? And it grew in my heart, and I never knew I wanted a son so badly. And in a short amount of time, my wife and I are praying and telling the gynecologist, can you do one more test? On a Sunday, I anointed her with oil, prayed for her, and it wasn't dramatic. But during that prayer, my wife touched the hem of Jesus' garment. On Friday, with the scheduled hysterectomy on Monday, they did a D&C. Test came back on Saturday, and when the doctor came down the hall whistling, we said, that's a good sign. He stuck his head in the door and said, the pathologist is baffled. He's consulted me 3 times saying this is not the same woman. Ken, your wife is 200% okay. We got pregnant with a little boy who was named Jonathan David. And he was all boy. He never showed any interest in music. He just loved to play sports. I don't care. If it was a ball, he was into it. But at 19 years of age, graduating from high school, he came in my room one night and he said, Daddy, didn't you used to play guitar? See, we never told him the whole thing. We told him, God healed your mommy, we had a baby. We didn't tell him what he was going to be doing with her. Did you used to play guitar? Can you teach me some chords? And so we sent him off to Nuneaton, YWAM in England with a guitar and a Bible. I came to visit him in November. And on the last night before we were returning home, some of the kids said, you should hear some of Jonathan's worship. I said, Jonathan, I got a little cassette replayer, and I know your sisters love to hear you. You're playing guitar better. He said, yeah, play a song, Daddy. And he played the song, and I went, oh my gosh, who wrote that? And he said to me now, he says, I'll never forget the look on your face, because you had waited 19, well really 20 years for a word of a prophet to become reality. We will dance in your palace all our days. We'll sing in your temple with all our praise. We'll shout down the walls in the name of your Son, because we will overcome. We will overcome. I said, Jonathan, you wrote that. I said, the first song you wrote is the prophecy of your entire life. My generation, the 60s, the hippies, we threw away our inheritance. We wasted what God gave us. It's your generation to take back what my generation destroyed. You're going to take back the land, and you're going to do it through the power of worship. And so it is that here I am, 71 years old, and it used to be, oh, Jonathan David, Ken Helser's your daddy. No more. You're Jonathan David's daddy? Oh, that can't be. I just say, I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God.
That comes to mind that is just like a beautiful memory?
A beautiful memory. Probably the day my son was born.
That was an awesome day. He wasn't expected to live, and so for him to be born at all was an awesome thing. And then he ended up passing away when he was 6 months old. But to me, that was the beauty, because I got to be with him for 6 months when I know friends who never got to meet their babies. So, but thank you.
So what we're doing is we're going around and taking photos of people that we find beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank y'all very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, I guess I'll just blush. Aww.
So do literally whatever you want.
That's really sweet.
Just do whatever you want.
Oh, thank you.